Alcaraz forehand. Now Alcaraz uses a mix really between the next generation forehand, which is this style here, more extreme Western grip, tip of the racket is facing down towards the court, and they lead with the elbow going back. From here to here, flipping the racket over, and this produces a lot of racket head speed, and they tend to finish quite low. If we think about Nick Kyrgios, he uses that next generation style forehand. Then on the other side we have Roger Federer's forehand, which is the standard ATP Tour forehand. The racket head starts above the grip level, and whilst he's preparing, his tip of the racket will be pointing up to the sky. Then he has the racket lag, and he finishes in that traditional across the chest way. Now Alcaraz has a mixture of both. He uses components from the Federer ATP style forehand, but he also uses components from the NextGen style forehand. His forehand grip is semi-Western, and at the start of his swing, what happens is it's in between that modern forehand, Federer style, and the NextGen forehand. The tip isn't facing towards the net, but it isn't facing upwards either. So it's at that in-between zone. Now from this position, what happens is he has space away from his body. He's using his elbow to create a bit of distance, so he isn't tucked in with the elbow. Once he reaches this side-on position, once he has coiled his upper body, we can notice that the tip of the racket starts to point towards the net. What happens is, from this position, once he reaches the power position and starts that racket lag phase, it has that massive flip. So it's creating more space for him to accelerate that racket, build up that racket head speed, and in turn get more power. Traditionally, you would have the racket head pointing up to the sky in that power position like this. This is the Federer style, the Nadal style, Djokovic style. With Alcaraz, we can see that sometimes his racket head will be in that position, which then allows for even more space for him to flip the racket over and create that massive racket lag. This is where it turns into more of a modern forehand. From this position, the racket starts to flip over, he starts that extension with the arm, and he uses a very straight arm on his forehand. He has a massive amount of racket lag because of this extension in the arm. And because the racket's going from this position to this position, it's allowing him to then have that massive racket speed created just by simply flipping the racket over. So whilst he's in that racket lag phase, we can see that the arm is really extended. He does a great job of extending through with that arm. Now this allows him to hit the ball much more in front than if you're having a bent elbow forehand. So he's making contact in front of his body, and this is where we can see a slight difference with the Alcaraz forehand to a lot of players. Most players will now go from this position, have the tip of the racket going upwards, using that windshield wiper motion, that supination in the forearm. And from here, they tend to finish with the racket head facing the left side of the court, the racket face, the side they've hit the ball with. So in this position, that is a standard finish for the ATP forehand. Now Alcaraz can finish like this. He also sometimes finishes across the head. But he also has the ability to actually snap his wrist and allow his wrist to go from this bent back position to almost flipping it all the way through, so his strings end up facing the ground because he has now actually allowed the wrist to snap. And this just shows you that he's very relaxed with his wrist. He isn't doing this consciously by having that wrist snap, by thinking about it. He's not thinking, I'm going to snap my wrist. What he's doing is he's being relaxed, he's creating that racket head speed, and he's allowing the racket to just come through in a very relaxed and loose way. And eventually it ends up with his wrist snapping into a position like this. And that's why we see the strings often facing the ground when he finishes that stroke. So it's that relaxation through the swing that allows that finish to happen. He also uses the ground force really well. He's loading up either in the open or the semi-open stance, and he really drives with that outside leg. He's driving into the ball, and he has a massive amount of leg drive into that shot. And that kick starts the kinetic chain. If you're loading up on that outside leg and then you drive from that leg, you're now kick starting the uncoiling of the body and then producing more racket head speed.